a red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we are here with Simon Kennedy. Hi Simon.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm absolutely fine, thanks. So we're just going to go straight into the big question. What's socialism to you?
I think socialism to me comes in many forms. I think you can look at the sort of the intellectual definition of it and the textbook definition of it, and there's a lot to be said about studying that. But I think it's more, for me, it's more on a more basic level in terms of what you see globally, but also locally. So globally, I would say the examples for me would be how Cuba interacts with other countries and helps people. They're currently getting nominated by many for the Nobel Peace Prize for its medical brigades, where it's been doing this for years. Where people need help, they will go and send their doctors and their nurses for no reward. No, it's no thanks. It's what they do. It's their humanity. So they've been this last year. They've been sending doctors into the most extreme areas that have needed support around COVID. So when Italy was having such a bad time, it was the Cubans that turned up, and for me that's an exhibition of I suppose putting their money where their mouth is. They don't just talk about socialism; they do it. But I also think that for me, other examples, and then I'll come on to say what I think it is. But other examples are, locally is how communities and individuals have responded to COVID, making sure that people are fed, that they're looked after, that they're not lonely. And I'm not saying that that everybody is doing that, but there is some just amazing examples of what people are doing, both locally and nationally. And when you see people like Pauline Towns over in who's Joe Solo's mate, she's a publican, and her and supporters through the pub are feeding people through this desperate time. It inspires you and it makes you humble. It partly makes me embarrassed that I'm not doing enough. But those people inspire, give you hope, and make you feel that actually that there are good people in the world. And sometimes I think when you see the bad things that go on, you start to think, well, that's the norm. Well, I think actually the reality is very different. I was rewatching. I think it was Ben Sellers had posted a Tony Benn clip about how when there were difficulties on the train coming back from London, it started out as a capitalist train. And by the time they'd broken down and they'd been delayed, and they were sharing coffee and tea, and they were looking after one another, and they were making sure everybody was okay, it became a socialist train. And I think that's what people are, is that when there are difficult times, actually people do come together, and I think the majority do. But historically, you see socialism in all sorts of places. The miners' strike for me was a big learning curve, I suppose. Not from a mining family, but to see the solidarity went in there, and the socialism that was alive and well in those communities. And that still, although that's a long time ago, the strike. How people think about it and how people view it is still evident. I think that socialism is alive and well. You might have seen that Anne Sudaku was who did a lot up here and nationally around the Women Against Pit Closure. She died recently, and her circumstances, I didn't know Anne, but her circumstances was that there was a Just Giving a page put up to get some money to help bury her, and to raise enough money for a memorial bench for her. And people were given money who didn't know her, never met her, but it was the right thing to do. And there was, I mean, I'm not trying to paint a rosy view of that everybody's fine, because on the page there was somebody that clearly was a scab during 84, 85, and he was trolling, and you know, was awful in his post. But you know what? People like me said, actually, you know what? I'm going to give double. I was going to give this amount of money, but I'm going to put more in. I'm going to put that money in your name. So I think for me, all those examples of what socialism is, or their examples, but I think trying to boil it down for me is it's about treating people with respect, making sure that people are treated the way that you want to be treated, and that well, Corbyn came up with a tagline of for the many, not the few, and I think that sort of sums it up for me. It's trying to make society better, fairer, looking after people, and I think it can be achieved. I think, you know, the NHS is a cracking example. I know lots of people will quote that, but it's real. We all pay a bit in, and we all get what we need out, and that's not a bad way to run society.
Thanks, Simon. I've got two directions I want to go here. So, firstly, I'm going to go into, like, you personally. Have you always known that you're a socialist, or is it something that came to you later, or was it something you always were but didn't really have the word for?
No, I don't think I was I don't think I was a socialist when I was younger. I think it's something that I learned. It's not to say that the essence were there. My mum and dad weren't particularly political. They voted Tory in 79, as unfortunately lots of working class people did. But the things for me that I can remember that that pricked my consciousness and made me think about things was that me mum and dad were in our house were very vocal around the apartheid, and although, you know, as a young kid, I didn't live in a mixed community. I didn't know people from different races and backgrounds. As you know, many communities in the 1970s were very you know, were very white where we lived, but it was just wrong, and that was something that I think helped me sort of start to view the world that that everybody's the same, and just because somebody is you know, within South Africa, just because they were black, doesn't mean that you should treat them with any less respect than anybody else. If you're a person, you're a person. And also my mum was very much in an anti-hunt. She wasn't not that she was into Sabin or anything like that. That was my cousin, but certainly was very became very animated about being against the hunt and cruelty around animals. And I think that for me, if you are opposed to cruelty to animals, and I am, you know, then why wouldn't I want to be opposed to cruelty to people? Because you know, it's there are so many bad things in the world, and you have to have an emotional response to those things. If you don't, then there's something wrong with you, I think. So I think so it didn't really come from home. Where my politics were learnt, I suppose, was was round somebody else's family table. When my dad lost his job when I was 18, and we'd moved around the country, and we're from the northeast, and we came back to the northeast when I was 16, and my dad lost his job, and he got another job down in Derby, and I didn't want to go, so I moved out, and they moved down to Derby, and I had a flat and led a very bedsick type of existence with one of my pals. And it was that my best friend's parents and family that became my surrogate family, and they looked after me. And they were the Reeds who lived in Washington, and round their Sunday table, one, they fed me, both physically and emotionally, and we talked politics. And Vince had worked at Westo and had been on strike in 84, 85. So this would have been 87, 88. And what I learned there, lots of people would have to go to university for a long time, study an awful lot, and they wouldn't get half of it. It was real. It was intelligent, and if you said something, you had to back it up, but in a really understanding and caring way. And I learned loads, and that's what lit the fires in me. And I never looked back.
That's a really nice story, and obviously, what you keep referring to, I've noticed, is you keep on referring to internationalism here. Like that seems to be a running theme with you, and I know that from knowing you personally, that you're very much interested in international affairs and international socialism. And I think what I find quite strange is some people, when you mention the solidarity that Cuba show the countries, they'd probably raise their eyebrows, and that took a little while for me as well. And I think I learned that from within the trade union movement and with you. So, what would you say to someone who doesn't really know about what Cuba are trying to do, and basically have this idea that all they know is the Cuban Missile Crisis? They were the enemies of the West, so-called enemies of the West. What is it about Cuba and what goes on in Cuba that you respect?
I mean, I've never been to Cuba. I mean, I'd like to go, but I mean, I've met many Cubans over here, and I think people have to remember, and we're very bad at history in Britain. We don't teach it. The curriculum is very poor, I think, around history. But Cuba was a dictatorship. It was it was a bloody awful place for working people to live. You would end up in jail or you'd be shot, and they tried to overthrow, and it was backed by America, but which sort of dictator wasn't backed by America? But the thing for me was that it was the struggle of ordinary people who said, we're not doing this anymore. We need to change. And when you look at history, it will talk about Fidel Castro and it will talk about Che Guevara, and both of those are political heroes of mine. But it was the trade unions within Cuba that were on a general strike. This wasn't just a few adventurists who were trying to raise an army. This was the peasants. This was the workers who had enough of being exploited and wanted change. And it wasn't a socialist or a communist revolution to start off with. It was just trying to throw off the oppression of a dictator, and it changed as things went on. But for me, it's not about labels in terms of was it this or thisism. It was about what they did for people, and they changed the country fundamentally, and they put people first, and they made sure that people could read, that they could that they were fed, that they were housed, and that they were looked after when they were ill. And I don't think that's unreasonable. You know, if I was Fidel Castro, those are the things that I would be trying to achieve for the people that I represented. And I'm not saying that Cuba was perfect, because show me where it is, you know, and it'll be the first. You know, they they did things wrong. They do things wrong. But I think in the face of being at war, and they are at war, whether it's an economic one or a military one with their neighbours, which is the most powerful country in the world, they will have made mistakes. But I think their intention is right. What they try to do is they try to make sure that people are looked after, and they value everybody. And if you're valued as a person, then you also, you know, want to help and want to give back. And I know that there are, you know, many who left and went to America, and you know they certainly don't like the government in Cuba, but there's lots and lots stayed. And there's lots, you know, when you see their boxers who fight in the Olympics, they could all become professionals and go and earn an absolute fortune. They could, you know, but they don't. They stay, and they're with their families, and they're with their people. And I think what they have done there is quite remarkable. You know, the infant mortality is better than America. They have a, you know, superb literacy rate. They are developing medicines that they give away to the rest of the world for free. They've done stuff with meningitis. They're doing stuff with COVID, and they'll share that. And I think that's, you know, that's how you help people. That's how you gain respect. And you know, when it's, for me, you know, when I look at when we look at the likes of Mandela, when he came out of prison, you know, the first people that he went to see were the likes of Fidel Castro. He was a brother to him, because when there were difficulties, it was the likes of Cuba who supported them financially and military to be able to overthrow apartheid. And Mandela made no excuses, you know, wouldn't accept any criticism for doing that, because Cuba put its money where its mouth was, and it does help people.
It's interesting what you were saying there about COVID, and they're the first Latin American country to develop a COVID vaccine, and they've also developed an HIV vaccine, and they're the world leaders in vaccines. And if we wanted to have some solidarity, if we'd have put some resources into Cuba, I think we would have probably had a COVID vaccine a little bit earlier, because that is their area of expertise, isn't it? The vaccine, they wanted to vaccinate their people against these awful, terrible diseases. And I also heard as well that they've apparently, I'm not 100% sure on this, but eliminated mother to child passing on HIV. And, you know, I think there are around 3,000 people a day born with HIV. And you think what a remarkable feat that is, because they're focused on the health of the people rather than, you know, maybe other things like the financialization of everything.
Yeah, and you've also, I think what we have to look at when you look at Cuba is that they're a tiny island. They're a tiny island with not many natural resources, not much industry, yet they still prevail, and they prevail because of the spirit of the people. If they'd wanted to get rid of Castro, if they'd wanted to overthrow the present government, they could, but they don't. And they don't because, you know, it might not be perfect, and it isn't perfect, but it's a damn sight better than what it was, and it's a damn sight better than what it could be. So, you know, I think uh, it it is to be applauded, but it shouldn't be looked through in rose tinted glasses. You know, they aren't as progressive in some areas than I think they could be, and I think that when they make mistakes, all of us, including those of us on the left, should point those out. You know, nobody gets a free ride. You know, just because you might say that you are a you know, this type of country, you're still open to criticism, but that, I don't think criticism is a we all learn. We all say, right, actually, yeah, we need to change. We need to move with the times. Um, and Cuba is making its own way, and that's what I respect. Is they won't be told how they should run their country. They'll make those. They'll make their mistakes. They'll make their right decisions, but they'll do it. And there's a lot of democracy within Cuba. There's a lot of participation, and you know, there's a lot of interesting things going on there that I think that many of us can look and learn and take note.
So I'm going to move on a little bit. You mentioned trade unions in Cuba, and the reason I know you and I know that you will always offer unconditional solidarity to me, actually, which is a hugely appreciated thing and such a rare thing. I know you through the trade union movement. So I want to ask you, where do you think trade unionism fits in with socialism?
I think there's a few things I could say in terms of um, I think trade unions are and can be socialist. I think they can be revolutionary. I think they could be conservative. I think they can be reactionary, and much of it is about leadership. Um, and there are some fabulous socialists in the trade union movement. Same as there's some fabulous socialists in the Labour Party, but that doesn't make it either the Labour Party or the trade union movement socialist. But I think the trade unions are a vehicle for change, for improvement of working people, and without them and obviously their members, we'd be in a very, very sorry state, and we wouldn't have had the significant changes that we've had over the last few hundred years. All the significant changes have come about through struggle. It hasn't been given to us, and it's that struggle's either been through industrial action or extra parliamentary action, and most of the time it's been led by the trade unions and trade unionists. So I think they are an integral part of a socialist society, and I think that they can do very great things. But again, just because they're a trade unionist or you're a trade unionist doesn't mean that that you're a socialist, and it doesn't mean that you're trying to improve, you know, society in general. I think that's where those of us who are socialists have got to be encouraging, pushing, organising, and educating people to what trade unions can achieve.
I think that's a very realistic view of where we are with regards to socialists within trade unionism. But is trade unionism itself a socialist concept? The idea of working together for better outcomes for people, is that coming together through trade unionism? Is that kind of a socialist idea that maybe not everyone identifies as a socialist within the trade union movement, but the idea behind it is, do you think that is a socialist thing?
Very much so. I think I mean the trade union, historically the trade union that inspires me is the NUM and the Durham Miners Association, and what they set when they set themselves up at the in the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, they were led by people who weren't socialists. They were Methodists. And as we moved into the 20th century, some of them weren't very progressive. But what they did was very socialist in terms of its outcomes, because they set up the welfare state in County Durham, or in the mining area of County Durham, way before the 45 government did. They had schools, hospitals, libraries, leisure facilities that was all paid for by miners from their wage that was given into the miners' union, and that money was put together for the benefit of everybody. And that, I think, is the model, that and I think that is quite revolutionary in terms of certainly at the time of how it was done. And it was about looking after their people. They couldn't do it as an individual. The state wasn't doing it. So you know what? The trade union will do it, and they delivered. So I think that model is remarkable, and it shows you what trade unions can do and how they are socialist in terms of what they produced. But if we were to look at the politics of some of the leadership at the time, I don't think you'd call them socialists. But it doesn't matter, because labels aren't important. It's about what you deliver and what you do for people. And the DMA did a hell of a lot for its people. And I don't just mean its members, I mean its people. The people in the communities were looked after, were supported. If you were ill, you didn't lose your house. You didn't, your kids would see a dentist. Your kids would see the doctor. And that, considering at the time that if you didn't have the union to look after you, you'd have none of that. So I think they can be very socialist in terms of what they deliver. They're trying to deliver fairness. They're trying to improve the lot of working people, and that's a noble cause. Maybe I would say that, but that's how I see it.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of what you've spoken about there, about that community and community spirit almost that comes with that. I believe personally that is the form of socialism that I think will be the kind of socialism that could work eventually, given power. I don't think you can possibly do top-down socialism and just tell everyone to be socialist. Power needs to be given to ordinary people to build those communities. But you've mentioned all those things, and I know that there's so many achievements that the trade unions made around those, like even swimming pools for people. Like it wasn't just security; it was leisure as well. There was the welfare parks and all these things that they did. Do you think that people have kind of lost touch with what a trade union can do and have started viewing them as something else?
I think some people have. I think sometimes that's the fault of individuals. I think that's sometimes fault of trade unions. I think trade unions are their strongest when they focus on what is important to members, but at the same time looking to educate members. I mean, one of the trade unions that I respect the most is the RMT. The RMT is and makes no apologies for this, is a fighting militant trade union. You join them, their expectation is that you'll take action. Many times you don't have to take action because you're prepared to. But they had incredible growth in terms of their membership. And they delivered for members. And if you look at the rates of pay, not for all their members, because the job is not done, but if you look at the train drivers and the tube drivers, they are on good money. And the only reason they're on good money is because they're members of a trade union, and they're members of a trade union that they will be led into battle, and they will be supported by their members. And that's how it works. It is that solidarity. and it makes a significant difference, and that's why the papers love to attack the RMT. You know, Bob Crow was one of the most inspirational trade union leaders that I've known, and I met him a few times. And what you saw on the telly is what he was like in real life. For me, it was somebody that I really respected, who, you know, if he said it, he meant it. And you know, I think more trade union leaders like that are to be welcomed. And but it did, you know, and developed. You know, they don't just happen by accident. It is an interesting time that we're in. Unison have just replaced their general secretary. Unite are going to be replacing their general secretary, and it'll be interesting to see what the socialists within Unite do, and obviously those who are not socialists and are looking for a very different union, and hopefully the left will prevail.
So, some of our viewers may not really understand what a trade union is and what it is. Now, I always define a trade union as people who work in a place. That's what a trade union is to me. What is a trade union to you?
I think your version's not a bad one to use. I mean, I think a trade union is very much its members, and a trade union is only powerful if it has members and that they are prepared to become involved in the union and recruit and educate other members. Trade unions aren't buildings in London. You know, they're not head offices. They're not the you know, trade union officials. They're not, you know, I mean, many times we build those structures to help us deliver in the workplace, but it is very much about the workplace. And I think part of the problem that we've had is that because there's been, you know, the breakup of those large workplaces, then it becomes more of a challenge for trade unions. But they're still relevant. They're still making a difference. They're growing. You know, over 6 million members in the TUC, and if we didn't make a difference, we wouldn't be getting attacked by the Daily Mail all the time. I mean, I think that's a good barometer, isn't it?
It's always a good barometer. As someone who's been attacked in the Daily Mail personally, you know, I always take that as a judgment. Now, I remember learning from you that, like, as a trade union worker, you are there to represent the members. You work for the members. Do you feel like, I don't know, where did this come from, that like trade unions were a non-participatory thing? Because I find a lot of people in my profession, in teaching, don't really recognise the idea that they are the union. They see the union as maybe I don't know, maybe like almost an insurance policy against something really going wrong in their career, rather than something that they can actively get involved in.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think we've got into the situation where, for some, not all, but for some, it's like an insurance. You know, it's insurance for when you go to work. You insure your car, you insure your house. Well, why wouldn't you insure your job? And I've heard that being said. I've said it myself, and that view of trade unionism is wrong. I mean, just plain and simple. But I think society has changed over the years, and there are less volunteers in all organisations. There is less participation in all organisations, but I think I go back to what I was saying before. If you make it relevant, then people do care, do want to get involved. Not everybody's going to become a workplace rep. What you want is for them is to care what's happening in the workplace, and to be, one, to be a member of a union, but also that when they've got a problem, they go and talk to their union. That means their colleagues, their workplace rep. The idea that, me as a full-time official, and others, that we would come in on a white charger and solve all the problems, it's just, it doesn't work like that, and it shouldn't work like that. To have sustainable strength in a workplace that gives you power, because I think one of the things that trade unions, those who are very active, what they understand, that it's about power, and whether the employer has is more power, or whether it's more equal. And I don't mean that trade unions are trying to run companies, but it's about making sure that it is more equal. It's more fair in the workplace, and that if the employer does something that is unfair, there is a consequence, and that's a collective response by the people who work there. And that's very, very powerful. And I don't think people realize how much power they actually have when they exert that economic power. It's not political power when you're involved in a trade union. It's economic power, and it's significant. And when people come together and they say, no, enough is enough, they can change their workplace. I think the problem is that not enough realize that. And I don't think we do enough to educate people to understand that actually any problem can be solved. And employers do listen to trade unions that have the backing of their members, and can get you better pay. It is a safer place to work in if you're in a trade union. It's they can make a massive difference, and they do make a massive difference. As I say, 6 million people, more than 6 million people, wouldn't belong to a trade union if it didn't make a difference, if it wasn't worth being a member, if it didn't give them the opportunity to try and get better wages, better terms and conditions, better holidays, less, a better work-life balance. Those are the things that are important to people.
So I'm going to ask you a slightly different question on this. In my experience in trade unions, there's this idea that we should be pragmatic, and for me, pragmatism means compromise. It doesn't mean starting from a compromised position. What are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like, so from my point of view, I think sometimes trade unions pick a compromised position because they think, well, they'll never go for what we actually want, so we'll start from a negotiating position that is actually much closer to the position we think the outcome we want is. And is that a good strategy? Is that something? Is that something you recognise? Is that an unfair representation?
No, I mean, I think pragmatism is not a dirty word, and although I'm going to contradict myself here in the sense that I've talked about how trade unions can be revolutionary, can be socialist, but also I think that compromise isn't a dirty word. It depends on whether or not it is reasonable, and it's also about what do your members think. What do your members think that is fair in terms of a pay rise, or in terms of a change in their job? It isn't for me to tell them. I mean, although I work for a trade union, I'm also a branch secretary for the staff who work there, and I won't be told by the full-time official who is linked to our branch what I can and can't do on behalf of the members. It'll be the members that'll tell me what the position is. I'll give them my opinion, I'll give them my advice, but ultimately, as a branch secretary, we put it to a vote, and people then tell us, and I think that's a powerful, that's a powerful vehicle for because it's not the union that is compromising or is being seen to be reasonable. It is the members looking and saying, you know what, that's all right, because at some point you have to do a deal. Now you use your industrial muscle, you use your collective strength to try to get the best deal that you can. But it doesn't mean that you have to get into a battle every time. It doesn't mean there has to be a strike every time. But what the employer needs to know is that if they don't deliver what is reasonable to the membership, then there will be a collective response. And that makes that conversation much more interesting, because the employer also has to compromise. The employer has to be pragmatic. It isn't about the union giving in and giving away its position. It's about, two more equal organizations talking together with mutual respect. The difficulty comes is when the employers don't respect the trade unions. And what I mean by that is they don't respect their staff. Because sometimes bad employers will sort of try to make the trade union a separate entity. It's what you were saying in terms of what trade unions are. They try to say, it's the trade union. I mean, I've been called an outside malevolent force before, and I quite like the title. But the reality is, in that strike, the reason why we had nearly 90 people on the picket line is because they turned up. I didn't force them to turn up. They turned up on I think it was in a January on in the rain, and they turned up because it was the right thing to do. The employer was wrong, and eventually the employer realized they were wrong, and we got a good deal.
That's a really important thing to think there as well, because trade unionists don't really take action when things are going well. And I often think you can see the press will portray a strike or any sort of trade union action as being a negative thing, like, oh no, our trains aren't going to run, oh no, our schools aren't going to open, that kind of thing, without thinking. And then they blame the people who take the strike, either the unions, the people who work in a place, or the unions as some sort of external force. They'll blame them. However, would you agree that that would be the employer's fault if it ever gets to that stage? Because I know it's pretty hard to get to that stage.
Well, I mean, the laws that we have in Britain mean that it's so difficult to get to the point of a picket line. So there's got to be it's a failure on the behalf of the employer if we get to that situation, and the trade unions get the blame. But it's, I mean, I've heard people say, well, it's a failure of the trade unions as well if we get to that situation. I don't think it is a failure on our part. It's a failure of industrial relations, and we've got to look at why did we get to the situation where there was an industrial action, or there was a breakdown, and I suppose I look at it from one point of view. I try to look at it from other points of view, but I find it very difficult. So I would say that whose fault was it when the doctors went on strike a few years ago? The junior doctors, was it the doctors' fault? I don't see that at all. It was the government's fault. The government provoked it. The government created it, and the doctors didn't want to do it, but they did, and fair play to them. But I think there are many times when it's part of a strategy that the employers think that they can ride it out, that it won't hurt them, it won't hurt their business. But we've seen quite a few industrial actions recently where unions have been successful. Unite have had two massive successes. Didn't get any coverage in the papers, but the Rolls-Royce dispute that Unite won, absolutely fantastic. And BA have backed down over their hire and fire. And the only reasons why both those disputes were won was because the trade unionists were prepared to this, the staff were prepared to take action, and the leadership of the trade union were going to back them 100%. And in that situation, the employer saw sense, and I think that's what trade unions try to do many times.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. So I'm going to move on now to what are your hopes for the future? What role do you think, trade unionism can play in building a socialist society and a fairer society? Do you think trade unions will play a big role in that? And what advice would you give to people as well about joining a trade union?
I think trade unions can and will do what their members want. It's can they change society? Yeah, they could, but I think it will be dependent upon whether members want them generally to do it. But I think part of what we've got to look to is the education of members, the political education. There isn't much political education within schools. When you get taught about history, it's there isn't much that comes through there. So it's, where do you get that? I've got to say, I think the Labour Party's not great at it. So I think trade unions can and have had that role of being able to educate its members, sometimes formally. Trade unions used to send its members and activists to Ruskin College at Oxford to get degrees, and a lot of that would be in politics or economics. And they used to have formal education programs that were about politics. I think we should do more of it. I think members of trade unions are interested in that, because the economic power that you may or may not have in a workplace only takes you so far. You also need that political power as well, and understanding where understanding the battles, the victories and the losses that we've had as a movement in the past gives us the knowledge and understanding of what we can do in the future. And we'll have losses. We will have defeats, but we'll have victories as well. And every defeat we've got to learn from and move on and develop and educate and grow and come back stronger. So I'm hopeful for the future in terms of trade unions. I think I'm very optimistic that that they will continue, that they will grow, and that they'll make a difference to people's lives. I wish that there was many more people in, and I think that's something that I would say to anybody is, if you're not in a trade union, join, and if you are in a trade union, get involved, and if you're involved in a trade union, become a rep, because that's what makes the difference. That's what makes us stronger in work, and that's what can change. We can earn more money, we can have better work, we can enjoy our jobs, we can get a work-life balance, and the challenges that we face from the technological changes that are going to come, the difficulties that our fathers and mothers had in terms of the changes in industrial, when they introduced different what was I going to say? When they introduced machinery, God, I'll get the right words. When they introduced machinery into the workplace, it's not a very difficult word to remember, is it? There was responses. There were trade unions and trade unionists were concerned. There was direct action through the likes of Captain Swing. But all of that change is going to pale into significance in terms of the artificial intelligence that is going to change all of our jobs. And I think that we've got to understand the potential of what allows us to deliver. That if jobs are replaced by machines in whatever shape or form, then what can we do with that time? That time shouldn't be that we should then have to continue doing, trying to find work that we can do. There's a lot of money going to be created by these, by the changes in society. So why do we not then have the ability for all of us to be working significantly less hours, so that will give us a better quality of life, and that we can spend time with our loved ones? And if the last 12 months haven't taught us that, then actually, those are the important things that we've got to focus on, I think. And time is the new currency, isn't it?
I'm going to forgive you because of the lateness of the hour for not remembering the word machinery there, Simon. I'm I'm going to move on to one final question, which is it's a little bit left field, but if you are dealing with a bad faith actor, if you're dealing with someone you think is working in bad faith and will not be honest with you as an employer, would you ever agree to them, like, kind of just producing minutes at a later date? Or would you try and get yourself an agreed set of outcomes before the end of that meeting?
I mean, I think there's lots of strategies of dealing with people who you don't trust. I mean, trust is earned, isn't it? And there are times when your word is your bond on both ways. The shake of the hand, and I don't mean in a sort of backroom sort of way, but that if you say to somebody, this is what I'm going to do, they know that that's what you mean and that you'll follow it through. And the same goes for employers, and there are many employers out there who if they agree, if they say, right, you're going to get a 3% pay rise, you're going to get a 3% pay rise. But there are also some of those that'll say, no, that's not what I meant, that's not what we said. And I think it's for members of the union to know, they know their employer, they know their managers, whether they can trust them or not. But I think, if in doubt, get it written down, get it signed off, because then everybody knows there's no ambiguity. I've got to say, I've been to lots of meetings where memories were slightly divergent in terms of what was agreed. And I've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes there are mistakes, and I don't think that it's necessarily bad faith. I think sometimes it is just a failure of communication. It's it's an assumption, isn't it? This is what we meant by it. Well, was that actually explored? And I think that's a failure of communicating, isn't it? But ultimately, at some point, you do need to get it written down, because you never know when you might have to refer back to it.
Thanks, Simon. Are there any final messages? I would, from everything you've said as well, my final message on this would be, if you've got a rep in your workplace, get behind them, make sure they're backed up, and make sure that people in a school or in a workplace or anywhere else know that rep is working on behalf of everyone. It's not their opinion, it's the group's opinion. Any final messages you'd like to get out there for people in trade, with regards to trade unions, or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think trade unions can and do make a difference. I think if you support your trade your rep, if you don't think they're doing a good job, stand against them. Put yourself forward. If they're not doing everything you want, volunteer to be an assistant, help them. You can have a team. It doesn't have to be an individual. It's best when it's not. Get a workplace committee. But we all complain about work. It's sometimes it's good for the soul to have a bit of a whinge, but if it isn't good enough, then either put up with it and shut up, or actually say, actually, there can be something different. There can be a different way of doing this, and talk to your colleagues. And there will be trade unions out there. If you're not already a member of a trade union, there will be people who will be there to help you, guide you, and support you, because they too want to make your working life better. And I think we all deserve to have we have to spend a lot of time at work, and I think we all deserve for it to be as good as possible, and for us to get that better work-life balance, and to enjoy the short time that we have on this planet. And work is important, but it's not the most important thing that we do. Unfortunately, we have to earn the money to allow us to do the important stuff. But there are some big battles coming, Paul, and trade unions are going to be the only ones who are going to be able to fight them. I mentioned before about the impact of artificial intelligence on work, but we've got a massive issue around pensions. There are people who still have good pensions, but there are plenty who have rubbish ones, and there are plenty of people who have no pensions at all. And as a society, what are we going to do in 50 years' time when people who are retired, either you can't retire and you have to die in work, so people working in their 70s and 80s becomes the norm rather than the exception, or people are in poverty when they retire. And I don't want to be in poverty when I retire. When I was younger, I worked in a bank, and I used to see people coming in for their pension when they're retired, and I've seen far too many people with nothing, and those are big battles that we're going to have to fight as to win, to make that difference. Otherwise, we're going to repeat the failures, the problems that we've had in the past, and we'll be having workhouses again. We've got soup kitchens. The next thing will be workhouses.
A brilliant note to end on there, Simon. So solidarity forever to you, and thanks for all the solidarity that you show to so many people.
Thanks, Paul. See you soon.
Keep the red flag flying here.